Okay, Professor Krush here, and I'm going to do a brief overview of an assignment where we're working to do a color wheel that uses 4 levels of saturation, and as I like to call a muted color wheel. And there's step-by-step images, and this image is actually from the textbook. This is just a display. Again, that shows how when we do this wheel, we're using complementary colors. So in this example, there's orange and blue. And as you mix from the complements, a little bit of blue mixed to the orange gives a muted orange. And from the blue, a little bit of orange gives a muted blue. So you can still kind of see that as orange, you can still kind of see that as blue, but they're knocked down. The next area where you're mixing more from the opposite is where you get what are called chromatic grays. And that's here and here. So there's a visible hue. It's probably not going to look so much anymore like the original color. This kind of goes to ochre. As you're taking orange, you're mixing more of the blue to get this muted, this chromatic gray version of the orange. And the opposite, if you're taking that blue and you're mixing more of the orange, you're getting this chromatic gray version of the blue that kind of looks dark and looks like slate. One of the beauties of this is if magically you mix just the amount of the opposite color, you can actually arrive at the middle of what's called an achromatic gray. Achromatic gray, there's no visible hue. You can't see a color in it. It may look like a warm gray, it may look like a cool gray. This is kind of just neutral. If anything, it looks a little bit toward a cool gray, but there's no visible hue. And as you do this color wheel, you're going to have these bands, and hopefully one of those bands that you create, well, you'll actually arrive at an achromatic gray. So again, I don't have the step-by-steps that are in that part of the assignment module, but I can just, again, give a brief overview. So if anybody's confused, this hopefully will help. So there's the 4 levels of saturation. That would represent one band, and there's 3 of these bands that go across in the color wheel. Let me go to, these are the template sheets that I have. And this was an older sheet where there's kind of separation between the chips. Here's the one that you just saw in the book. Here's blue and here's orange. M stands for the muted version of those colors. And then inside of that is the chromatic gray. And then depending on which band you do, where you arrive at an achromatic gray, you would use that one for the middle. If you're a little confused looking at the wheel, don't worry. When I show you the finished ones, it'll make more sense. So this has to do with blue and orange, which are opposites, red, violet, and yellow, green. That's probably the toughest one because the outside colors are your tertiary colors. So you have to mix to get those, and then you're mixing across. Tiny bit of yellow green mixed with red violet gives this muted version of it, and vice versa. So you're always mixing from the opposite. The biggest challenge in this project is that this inner band of muted colors should actually still look like it's from the outside color. If it changes too much, you've muted it too much. This chromatic gray version in here, that's like anything goes. It's going to turn muddy, gray. The colors are going to look maybe a little weird, but whatever you get from that, you get from that. And of course, the achromatic gray in the middle is where there's no visible hue. So that was one sheet. This was more of an updated sheet that's technically a little bit harder to assemble, but it's kind of laid out nice. And it's showing you one band, again, where you have your muted yellow, chromatic gray, muted violet, violet. So the outer band, think of the outer bands as kind of bright prismatic colors. This next band of the muted colors are where you're mixing from the complement and you're getting a dull version of it. So this has the exact same bands of color. It's just that this one you have color chips that are a little bit smaller and there's a little bit space in between. to see what they actually look like. This is the old one, which you can still use, and this is pretty much how it comes out. Again, here's yellow and violet, and here's the muted yellow, muted violet, and so on. Here's green and red, and again, here's the muted green, here's a muted red, and as you add more, they get kind of muddy, brown-like, or whatever, and so on. Okay, there's another version of that, although the student rotated it. It doesn't have the yellow at the top, because it was glued down. But it's the same thing. This is actually a really good version because, again, if you look at the orange, you can kind of still see that as orange. It's going a little green, but you can see that it's pretty close to yellow. So you're seeing a good association. Remember, if those muted colors change too much because you've mixed too much from the complement, you're defeating a big part of the project, because we want to see that color, but we want to see it slightly knocked down, slightly muted. And the way to mute a color, one of the best ways, is to add a tiny bit from the complement. So that was two versions of that one. This other sheet, okay, where again it's a little bit more tedious. There's actually even a different version. This was an older version of that where there's square lines. Okay, and then the one that I have that I created for the step-by-step actually has not. I didn't complete it. I apologize, but I completed 2 of the bands in the step-by-step to see how that all works. So you have yellow and violet, and blue and orange in terms of seeing the example. And then seeing again the muted versions, the chromatic gray versions on the inside, and so on. So yes, what that would look like when it's complete would be something that looks a little bit more like that. So as far as working on this, when you're mixing down all your colors, you can see here's like violet. So if you have colors to make violet, here's your violet, and then you're adding from the opposite. So if this was your violet, what's missing here was actually peeled off the sheet. There's a patch of red there, which is showing you that the red and blue make your violet. Okay, and then by adding a little bit from the yellow is that muted violet. And here's the yellow. And taking that yellow and adding a little bit of the violet gives that muted yellow. So these are the colors from the palette sheet getting ready to be painted onto the Bristol. The chromatic gray versions are where, again, if you're taking more from that complement, notice how that gets real muddy and kind of brownish, but that's your chromatic gray version of the yellow. The violet, same thing. You're adding more from the yellow, and this almost starts to go into like a dark color, almost like a dark brown. And then magically, you can see a little violet there. But again, if that violet, which is here, and the yellow are mixed just right, this is a fairly good achromatic gray. Even though it's very dark, you would be hard pressed to look at that and be able to identify a color hue in it. Okay, so that's a sheet that should help just to, this is all based on one set. This is a lot of work because for that one band, you have yellow, and then you have red, which is not on here, I apologize, and blue to make the violet. And then those are on the outside opposites, like so. Here's the yellow and here's the violet. Here's the that muted yellow, which is here. Here's the muted violet, okay, which is here. And then here's the chromatic gray version of the violet, and here's the chromatic gray version of the yellow, and there's an achromatic gray in the middle. So I'm hoping this review will help any of you if you have any confusion. Once again, one of the best ways maybe to do this is actually take extra sheets and use these sheets to literally as a template to cut through when you have these color swatches painted, so that when you can actually, here's yellow, yellow, green, you lay it over your swatch, cut through there, and you have that ready to go and eventually be pasted into place. This is clearly the easier color wheel to do, because the color wheels are, the color chips are a little smaller, they're separated. The only curve that you have is on the outside. These inside shapes are squared off. So, the other one might be a little bit more fun. It's actually a little bit more attractive, but it's clearly more work. Do not do both, and either one is completely acceptable. Okay, so once there's no reason to go through the end. You know the drill from here. When you're cutting these chips, you're cutting everything out. You're gluing them to place on a nice clean notebook page. And when this thing is all assembled and done, then you're photographing that and uploading it into Blackboard for a grade. Okay, so I'm going to kind of just lay these out for a moment, and that's it. That's about as much as I can share. The step-by-steps actually I think would be more helpful, to get you through it if you have any difficulty. Okay, thank you.